Hey, what's up and hello. This is everybody's second favorite professor coming at you live on tape with another video. So, continuing from the isometric grid tutorial of last, we will be going over how to make certain elements inside of the room itself, starting off with a simple TV on the wall. So, I'm making a new layer because all the objects must be on the separate layer. And I'm using the space bar to pan around, control plus and control minus to zoom in, zoom out. So looking at this grid here, we're going to use the pen tool. I'm going to make the stroke red so we can see it temporarily. And then now we're going to start off in the top corner and we're going to go down. And then now we're going to go over. So you don't necessarily always have to go over to the full next grid. We can always go roughly somewhere in the center, but as long as you're along or on this diagonal line, you're fine. So I'm going to click roughly towards the center. I'm going to go straight up, and then I'm going to click on this line here, then go over to close it. Control Shift A. I'm going to click on the corner. I'm going to go over. I'm going to same thing, go halfway to the center point, and then go back over, and then close it. Control Shift A. Click on this anchor, go straight over to where it's diagonally going straight down from here. So here, go up, over, and then back down to close it. So now, as you can see, this is a little off. It's not going perfectly straight. I'm going to draw out my guideline and to match it up to the bottom. And then I'm going to zoom into the top. And as you can see, it's a little bit off. Very slightly. So I'm going to use my white arrow tool, keyboard shortcut A, which is the direct select tool. I'm going to marquee just over the corners, which is here. Then I'm going to click and pull it till it touches this corner. So now we know that this is now perfectly lined up with the bottom half using an extra guide. Now we can delete the guide by clicking on it and deleting it. So now we have the outside of the TV. Now if you want to create the inner lip of the TV, because most TVs do have a small lip still, we can click on the top corner, which is here. I'm going to go over, down, and up to create the screen itself. So now I'm going to click on this thick edge here, the top and bottom, or top and side. I'm going to change the color to fill. I'm going to click on the front panel here, make it the same color or slightly different. Now, if you want a different color, you have more than the swatches. You can go back to your swatch library, or when you go to your color panel and double click on it, you have the CMYK colors. So the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So right now, this black is at roughly 73%, 74% roughly. We can tone it down if you want to make it darker or lighter. So I'm going to make it lighter. I'm going to put it at 70. So it's a very slight change, but it will be noticeable. So I'm going to do the screen now. I'm going to make the screen a different color entirely, so that this could be a placeholder for an image. And then I'm going to turn off the stroke of this front plane. So now when I hide my guides, we can see that we now have a TV panel. Now if you want to make this thinner, meaning this is still pretty thick for a TV these days, you can simply use the direct select tool and again hold shift and select both this top and marquee over the corners here, and we can bring these in slightly to make them thinner. And then you would just have to manipulate the same corner over here, bring this in slightly, so that now it's a thinner panel TV. So that's how you make a TV panel. Next, we're going to make a little shelf under the TV, a freestanding shelf. So I'm going to use the grid and make a new layer. Again, I'm going to call this TV. TV. And call this shelf. And then now lock the TV layer because we're done with that layer for now. We can click on the shelf layer. And then the same thing goes. We don't have to start on the corners, but you can if you want. I'm going to click here. I'm going to go out 1. And then I'm going to go over all the way. Over and then back down. And now I can just make sure you go back and switch your fill to stroke. Command Shift A. Go down halfway, over, up to close it. Command Shift A. Same thing, go over, halfway, up, over, and close it. So now we have a shelf that rests underneath the TV. Now again, if you want to make this thinner or longer, meaning it sticks further out, we can turn back on our grid and we can use the direct select tool, which is A. We can marquee over just this one corner here, and we can physically pull this longer, say to here. Same thing, marquee over this entire corner to get these 3 points, which is the top point of this top panel and then the side of this first panel. Bring it straight back down. So that now we have a longer shelf once we turn off the grid. So then we can simply click on here, add color, swap it for the fill, add color, hit fill, make it slightly darker, and then we can simply turn off the stroke. So now when it comes to light and shadow, we need to make sure that, for example, if the light's coming from the top ceiling, all the front panels will be lighter. So this will be lighter, this top panel will be lighter, this one will also be just as light, and this one will be casting shadow. So we don't want it to be the same light, so we can simply, again, click on this sample color here to make it the same match, but then go back to our color panel where we have the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and we can just lighten it up by simply going down in hue so that it keeps it to be the same brown, but it is a lighter hue of that particular brown. So now we're going to make another object so we can lock the shelf layer because we're done with that. And then we're going to click on the new layer to make a new layer. And this time we're going to make a table and chair. So for example, if you want to make a rounded object, you can still use the squares because when you're drawing a perfect circle, you can draw a perfect circle from a square. Now the keyboard shortcut for the ellipse tool is L. So I'm going to make sure my fill is off, my stroke is active, make sure it's a color we can see. So I'm going to go with blue this time. Actually go with red again. And then we can zoom in to focus on a square patch. So I'm going to focus on these 4 here. Now in order to draw an ellipse, you can either grab the corner and drag it out like so, and you would just angle it along the bottom. So we start in the center top of the panel so we can drag out a perfect ellipse. Now we can let it go and we can grab the edges and pull them out so that it still hits the corners perfectly. And that's how you draw an ellipse or a circle in perspective versus just drawing a regular circle on the actual document. So then now I'm going to hold the Alt key, which is the keyboard shortcut, when an object is selected. I'm going to click on the stroke because right now there's no fill, so we can't click on the fill. We have to click on the stroke, and you see the double arrows, the black and white arrows that appear. That means that the clone tool is active. By holding Alt key on the keyboard, I'm going to click and drag down, and as you can see, it's going to clone it down once, like so. So now we have 2 rings. So I'm going to cut back to my square, hit M, keyboard shortcut. I'm going to click on my top left of the top ring, and I'm going to go down to make sure it hits the bottom part of the ring, and then I'm going to go over. So now what this does is I'm going to turn off the grid. So now we have 2 rings here. So we have 2 rings in a rectangle. The rectangle is going to form the bottom half of this bottom ring to make the sides. And this top ring or circle is going to be the top panel. So we can hold shift while the rectangle is selected. I'm going to click on the bottom ring. And now we can go to the Pathfinder function and join them together so now they're one shape. Now it looks kind of funny because it just merged these 2 shapes together. But when we go to add the color, so I'm going to use a blue on the fill. So rotate the fill. And then I'm going to make this top one darker by clicking on the same color and then putting my black to be, say, 10%. Making the fill, using my black to be 10%. So now it's underneath it because we made this bottom 2 shapes after we made the first one. So we just have to press Command Shift right bracket, which is to the right of the P. The left bracket sends it back. The right bracket brings it to the front. So now we have a cylinder that can serve as our stool top using these 2 different shapes. Well, 3 shapes, but 2 shapes ultimately. So now we can turn back on our grid. So this follows the grid perfectly from the top panel. So now we're going to just use the rectangle tool and we're going to draw a rectangle going straight up and down, but making sure it intersects at the center point of this center line where the ellipse is. And again, we can change the color to be a different color, to be a more metal color. And then now for the stool legs, we can make a simple basin. So I'm going to click on, hold shift, click on these 2 shapes, again Alt, and drag it downward. And then we can scale it in. And then making sure that this center point is right here at the center of this line. And now if we want to zoom in and we want to make this ring shorter, we can't just nudge it up like so, because it has this extra gap in the top. We're going to have to first then use the, again, shape build tool or Pathfinder to make another rectangle over top to intersect it so that it should look something like this, where you hold shift. You have this rectangle covering up this top half here. When we go to minus, it'll cut the top from the bottom, so that now it'll give the illusion of it being a smaller ring. So we can again Command Shift left bracket send to back. So we're going to cut it here using the minus Pathfinder tool. And then now we're going to bring it back up so it touches the corner, Control Shift left bracket sends the back. So now we have a basin for it to sit on. And then we can hold Shift and select these two top panels, Control Shift right bracket, bring to front. So now we have a stool-like chair. Now alternatively, if you want this bottom of this bar to be rounded, which it should be, we can scale this in slightly to make it look more like a beam. Again, moving the center point back to the center intersection, and then hitting L for the ellipse tool, this time making an oval. And then we can bring the oval down to be just over top of this shape, selecting both, again with the Pathfinder, unite, and it makes it one shape. And then we just have to right click on, cut it here. Then we just have to hold Shift and select the top plane, then Command Shift right bracket, bring the front. So now we have a perfect stool that simulates, we have the roundness of the top, the roundness of the bar, and then the roundness of the basin. And that's how you create a rounded object in an isometric grid. You're using the squares to get the measurements of the circle's circumference. So that's how you can make a bar stool. And now technically the bar stool would go beneath the shelf, for example. Which would actually make the TV a window, but that's a whole nother story. So now in order to make a table, we're going to lock this stool layer, make a new layer. Actually, we can hide it temporarily. Hide the stool layer. And then we're going to click on the next layer, P again, making sure the fill is off, stroke is active, change the color to a visible color. And then now we're going to draw out a table. So I'm going to start in the corner, go over, and down. And this is just to get the tabletop. Command Shift A. Go down halfway, over, up, and collapse. Control Shift A. Up to the top. Close it. Command Shift A. So now as you can see, it's a little off. So whenever it's a little off, you can simply use the white arrow tool, mark key over the problem area, and make sure it hits either the corner of the circles or somewhere along the line, but making sure that the vertical lines are always perfectly straight up and down. So now that we have a tabletop, we're going to use these squares as references for the legs. So for example, I'm going to use the P. I'm going to draw a smaller half circle rectangle. I'm going to draw out a perfect square, but then I'm going to scale it down. So in order to scale something, transform transforms it. But when you hit S to scale, it brings everything in proportionately when you grab one of the actual lines. So now I'm going to bring that in. And then I'm going to use the arrow key, Control Shift A, pen tool to go straight down to make the leg, up and over to intersect the point here, close it here, Command Shift A, make the other leg, intersecting point, close it here, go up and close it. So now we have the leg made. We can group these together temporarily. And then I'm going to move it down here to be in this corner. So that then I'm going to copy this up. So holding Alt, copy it up to this corner. Copy it over to this corner. Copy it down to the other corner. Now, alternatively, you could do it after you make the color choice. For example, I'm going to undo this. Because these are all going to be the same color, we can color in the tabletop first. I'm going to turn off my guides temporarily. You can double click into it so that you can see when you enter into a group, the rest of the scene will white out, and the only thing that will be in full color is the group itself, which is in this case the table leg. So again, I'm going to switch my fill on. I'm going to make this side darker, lighter. And now technically we don't really even need the top because the top is never seen unless the table was glass. But for the sake of anchoring, I want to still give it a color. And the color really doesn't matter. It could be black because you won't see this at all. And then I'm going to turn off the stroke. Cut it here. And then I'm going to turn off the stroke. So it's a seamless color. And then when I go back to my layer 6, I'm outside of the group. And it's still grouped together. So turning back on my layer for my guide, I'm gonna Alt and copy it up, put it here in this corner, copy it up, put it here in this corner, copy it over, put it here in this corner. So again, turning off my guide layer. And then when I go to add color to my tabletop itself, again, the top is going to be lighter. So turning on my fill, top is lighter. This side can be darker. And this front side is slightly darker than that one. So now because we made the tabletop's legs second, they're going to be automatically on top. So again, that's just a simple matter of going to holding shift, selecting the entire table, which is this, control shift right bracket, which is bring to front, so that then it brings the table to the front and puts the legs behind. So now we can lock the table layer, or we can make sure this is all grouped together by marking over everything, pressing Command or Control G. So now the table is grouped together. So now when we can maneuver the table anywhere on this grid, because remember, we made it on the grid, so it's always going to fit somewhere within the isometric grid. No matter where you put it, it's always going to fit perfectly within another nested square set. So I'm going to bring this table down here, lock the table, unlock the then same thing, we can marquee over and make sure we have the actual table, the chair selected. So now, when it comes to your finished product, oftentimes they cannot be on separate layers because, for example, this stool should be right here, but it also needs to be in front of this table leg. So that only works if this exists on the same layer. So in this case, I'm going to Control X to cut my stool from its own layer, unlock my table layer, click on the table layer, and you can press Command or Control F to paste in place, which again, instead of copying, which is Command V, paste in place puts it back exactly where you copied it from. So again, because the table is grouped, if we were to just do a simple Control Shift, bring the front, it will still put the leg in front of the stool. So I need to ungroup my table, Control Shift G to ungroup. Now the leg is grouped together, so we need to still make sure that the table section is grouped together. So I'm going to Control Shift, Control G, the tabletop. But then this individual leg, we can technically delete it, but I'm going to leave it because you never know if I want to change it. I'm going to Control Shift left bracket send to back. So it's technically still there if we were to move this bar stool somewhere else. So now alternatively, we can Alt and copy another bar stool to the other side of the table. like so. So remembering that because you have different objects on different layers, if the objects are interacting or overlapping, they need to be on the same layer. But if they're totally separate on separate ends of the room, then they don't touch each other, you can avoid having to have them on the same layer. So in this case, I would just call this table set because it comes with the legs, and I can delete the stool layer. So now we can lock this layer. And then now the same thing would go to if we were to make, say, a area rug, turning back on the layer, making a new layer. And then we can make a simple area rug. So using the pen tool. And then in this case, I'm just going to leave the fill on because we're going to fill it automatically. And it's really just making one shape. So I'm going to choose a color from an area rug. And I'm going to, on the bottom table, I'm going to click here. I'm going to go down. I'm going to go up. And then you want to go, again, along this line, but along this line as well. So it's going to match here. And then close it. So because we made it, the new layer was made underneath. It's going to automatically be underneath it versus if it was on top, you would just simply have to change the order of the layers in order to get them to move. Now, because it is an isometric grid, we can technically move this anywhere and it would still be proportionately scaled or positioned to be underneath the actual table itself. So once you make an object, you don't necessarily have to keep it on the grid because it's made on the grid. It's always going to be in the same angle so you can move it wherever you want to. And it always be on the perfect perspective. And that's how you create a few basic objects in an isometric grid.